Hi there, and welcome to this Hall of Tyrannus podcast, which has been brought to you by the Tree of Life Foundation. My name is Johan Snyman, and I'm your podcast host. Today I have the pleasure of speaking to Pieter Faure. Pieter is the CEO of the Mergon Group, a private equity investment company with a current gross asset value of close to 4 billion rand. The core goal of Mergon is to invest its resources and distribute the proceeds to partner organizations who serve the Kingdom of God with social impact programs in South Africa, the rest of Africa, and the Middle East. Pieter obtained a law degree from the University of Pretoria before commencing his professional career at PwC. He proceeded to study accountancy at the University of Johannesburg and qualified as a chartered accountant in 2002. After completing his articles, Pieter specialized in corporate international tax at PwC, and just when it seemed his career would focus on corporate tax, he felt a calling to a more entrepreneurial future and joined seasoned entrepreneur and philanthropist Francois van Niekerk in 2005, initially as financial director in Francois' technology business, Infotech, which eventually became part of what is today known as the Mergon Group. Pieter has also previously been a guest speaker at one of our Hall of Tyrannus Cape Town chapter events, and we most certainly regard him as part of our extended family. Pieter, it's a privilege to have you on our podcast today. Thank you for your time. Great to be with you.
Good morning, Johan. Thank you so much for having me. It certainly feels different from our previous conversation where we were all sitting together in a room in Cape Town.
It does feel very different, and I do miss those days of in-person networking and conversations. But for now, we take the second best route via Zoom. But super excited about this conversation and chatting to you today. So thanks so much again. To fire off the first question, just really interested to know how you are doing, your family, personally, professionally, spiritually. How have things been since the 26th or 7th of March?
Yeah, thanks, Johan. Yeah, I'm doing well. As you can see, I have a nice study, and so been amazing to adapt so quickly to working virtually. I guess, like most people, the biggest challenge is to manage the boundaries between work and personal and family life. The other night, I was on a couple of late calls, and my kids came and said dinner is ready, and I walked out of my study and I sat down at the dinner table. And as I sat down, I said, "Wait a minute, this is too much. I need to figure out the 10-minute commute for myself, at least, to manage this transition from the office to the dinner table." So yeah, it's been a privilege to be able to continue working really productively, and but it's also been amazing to spend more time with the family and do life a bit slower, I guess, than usual in one respect. Spiritually, it's been a really challenging and interesting 7 weeks, I guess, like has been the case for everyone. Yeah, I've personally been through a lot of the emotions that's come with the cycle, going through, the sort of concerns, the worries, and yeah, it's been a journey. And the one thing that's for sure, I guess, that I can say with certainty is that even though all of us are in lockdown, God is definitely not in lockdown. And He is continuing to work in and through us in this time. And I think that's been amazing for me to just journey with God through this time.
No, that's fantastic. And I agree with you with regards to the fact that God is definitely not locked in. A friend of mine recently said we might be locked in, but we're not destroyed. And I think that's the spirit of it, and what I've been picking up from a lot of Christians in general. And on the practical side, I also agree with you. Doing everything in one physical space, eating, sleeping, training, family, personal work, it does get to you after a while, not being able to, as you say, get that 15, 20 minutes to switch off on your commute from work to home. So I've also found that to be quite challenging. And some days I've managed it better, and other days not so well. But I think the trend is at least upwards, which is net positive.
Yeah,
So
having young kids sort of keeps you honest, because
Yeah.
there comes a point where they barge in and say enough.
Yeah, exactly. I've had a few of those BBC moments. I don't know if you saw that interview a while ago when a guy had an interview, I think on BBC, and his kids pranced into the room. And I've had a few of those on Zoom, but luckily most people have been
And
gracious.
yeah, what's interesting, Johan, is how that would have been like, I mean, BBC newsworthy a few years ago, or a few months ago, and
Exactly.
now people just accept it as
Yeah.
that's life. You know, it's almost like we've adapted already, and got to a point of saying it's okay for life to barge in on work every now and again.
No, that's very true. It's amazing how quickly mankind can adapt when we're forced to. And this has definitely been one of those situations, still is, where we're forced to adapt to a new normal very quickly. And maybe on that point of new normal and just being in this lockdown state,
Yeah.
are there any things that have just become a reality to you, new things, any wins, anything that unexpectedly came out as quite a win for you just because you've been forced in your house and working from home? Anything that stood out?
Yeah, I think probably one of the real wins has been around family. And for me specifically, the realization that I need to lead my family through this, and specifically spiritually to lead my family through this. And so we've had some wonderful devotion times. Having younger kids, we've had to be creative with that, and it's been real fun. You know, we've gone through walking through the garden with the Bible, and
Oh.
asking the kids what does God say about flowers, what does God say about trees, and what we've gone through, done some washing of feet, and so it's been an amazing time for us as a family to discover our spirituality more as a collective unit. And yeah, so I guess that's been a real win for me. One of the things at a Mergon level that's been a win, it has been we've really had some great times of prayer. We've always had Monday morning prayer meetings, but we've a while ago established a Wednesday prayer meeting where we just invite the ministry to come and share their story with us and share with us their challenges, and that has been such a inspirational and encouraging time for us, and it's been fantastic to see how people have all dialed into these calls, and so it's been something that we've sort of established through this time that I think really is going to, and I hope really will last going forward. And so we've had people from the Middle East and from different parts of our country and so on dialing in, and just hearing their stories. So that's been from a work perspective, I think, some cultural gains that one unexpectedly have made through this time.
As you say, this is a time to bed down culture. Culture is one thing that doesn't need to change in times such as these. It actually should be reinforced. So it's fantastic to hear that you guys, as a team at Mergon, have been experiencing such a unification around this theme and around what's happening and just reinforcing your culture. Is there anything specifically that has stood out in these Wednesday or Monday sessions? Something that has really just come to the fore again and been re-emphasized?
Johan, so in our, just to give you the full picture, in our sort of weekly rhythm, we now have these Monday and Wednesday morning prayer meetings. Mondays is typically we pray for Mergon and what's on Mergon's agenda, and also for whatever's happening in the lives of the team members. Wednesdays we pray for our partners for half an hour, and then on Fridays we do a Zoom lunch together,
Okay.
and so that's really a bit more fun. And we've also done a couple of longer sort of culture sessions on these Wednesdays where we've invited someone from the outside to come and speak to us. We've even done a bit of a workshop online. So I think I guess thinking about what stands out for me is just the participation. You know, it's almost as if it's become a real highlight in people's week, that people are craving for this time of community in the week. And whereas when we're in the office, you sort of take it for granted, and you're actually too busy to, you know, some people are too busy to dial in or make the time. It really has become a prioritized time in people's diaries. And I think that's for me been a real highlight.
I love the idea of a Friday afternoon Zoom lunch. I think so many things happen around a lunch or dinner table, and to have those times together, a fellowship, even if it's via Zoom, I think it's why not harness the technology and still eat together and have those conversations and just share life and food, even albeit virtually. I think
So
that's
we
something
we even had a Zoom dress up lunch,
really
which was interesting,
I can
because
imagine.
we had some very creative people playing with the backgrounds on their Zoom. So people were having lunch. There was one person having lunch in the Oval Office in the White House.
May I ask what the dress up theme was, or was it open to everyone's own
It
creativity?
was open to everyone's creativity.
Okay.
Maybe as a last point, one of our sessions that we've just had was around building authentic relationships. And it was, it's an interesting topic in this time where it almost feels like you're limited in building
Mm.
relationships. How do we continue to build authentic relationships? And I guess it's just become clear to me that people want to continue building relationship. The fact that you're at home gives you a bit more flexibility, but people do value the office and the community and the relationships that we have.
No, that is so true. We are, as humans, irreducibly social beings. So that want for relationship and being together will, I don't think, ever be quenched. And it is great to see that people are intentionally reaching out over Zoom platforms and Teams platforms and all these various digital platforms. And I think that that'll be a theme that will continue, however long this current or next state of lockdown will be. We spoke about culture, being reinforced in times such as these. Strategy, on the other hand, sometimes do get tweaked, sometimes by only a few degrees, sometimes quite aggressively. So I'm just interested to hear from you for Mergon as a group, the impact of COVID-19. Has that impacted you in the sense that you've had to tweak, albeit marginally or exponentially, your strategy? And what are the one or two or three business levers that you guys are currently keeping a keen eye on?
Yeah, Johan, I mean, it's been a bit of a crazy time for us, I guess, like for most businesses or organizations. At Mergon, our strategy is very much wrapped around being an entrepreneurial group. So we tend to always operate a little bit outside of our comfort zone and pushing the boundaries, I guess, on the entrepreneurial investment side, and also pushing in terms of how much we can distribute. And so just to sort of quickly say, our approach really is to invest in a bespoke sort of focused portfolio of investments. And our aim is to build a resilient portfolio rather than a diversified portfolio. We believe a resilient portfolio is one that will be able to withstand the crises, and when you come through it, actually you can capitalize and even accelerate out of the crisis, rather than aiming for stability and having very wide diversification. So that approach always carries some risk and opens you up for some risk, especially or some instability in times like this. And so from this portfolio, we then seek to fund distributions to ministries, and we want to, over a long term, be able to fund sustainably and growing distributions. So to match all these things is tricky at the best of times. And in this time, it was particularly tricky. So maybe to say that for us, I don't think our strategy has changed. If anything, we feel that the portfolio has shown itself to be fairly resilient. I think, what's been real important for us has been the fact that we've had our investments split across industries. We've historically had a very strong anchor in real estate, retail property. And as you know, retail property has been probably the worst affected through this crisis. And so we're really, I guess just incredibly thankful that as we look back over the last 5 to 7 years, we've actually substantially diversified the portfolio to a point where real estate has gone from over 70%, almost 80% of our portfolio a few years ago to around 30, 35% of our portfolio. Having said that, our real estate investments play a very large part in delivering our cash flows that we get out of our portfolio. So it's quite a critical part of our portfolio. And of course, you expect that you could have some, risks on a portfolio of real estate assets. But if it's spread across a number of countries, a number of geographies, you really don't expect all of it to be closed down by a single event at the same time. So we, as much as we could have thought about this, I don't think anyone reasonably would have expected one to plan for this sort of event. And so for us, if I look back and sort of just step out of the situation for a moment, I think, for us, this whole thing has sort of played out as a 3-stage sort of event. The first part was, really about being in the storm and surviving the storm. We, as this crisis hit, our developments were being shut down. The investments that we were holding, investment properties, a lot of them had to be shut down. And, our biggest investment in the real estate side is in a listed company called Mass, which experienced almost a 75% drop in share price in a few weeks. And so through all of this, we had to really hustle just to make sure that we are able to manage all cash flow requirements. The fact that we were sacrificing some dividend inflows from our portfolio. So for us, the storm presented itself as a liquidity crisis. And so, those first few weeks were quite stomach churning as you just didn't know where the end of this was and how much cash this was going to require to stabilize. Once things started stabilizing sort of 3 weeks ago, I guess it's about repairing the damage out of the storm. You come out of a storm and you look around, you survey the damage. And for us, the damage was in the fact that our near-term cash flows were really compromised for the next few months. And so we had to start making plans to manage that. One of the big questions for us was around distributions, which is a very large part of our cash flows. And, do we continue or do we not continue with distributions? And so we made the decision that we are going to continue with all our distributions. And so, over this past few weeks and in the next while, part of our priority is to make sure that we secure all the needed cash flows. And, we've seen some breakthroughs which can only come from God. Funds that's come in, government departments that's paid up old debts all of a sudden, that we didn't expect to see come through, And so really, if God is good to us, we are going to come through this without missing a beat in terms of our commitments to our partners and without really having to experience too much, I guess, damage from the storm, if I put it in that way. And then, Johan, the third part for me of this is once you sort of come through and you've sort of managed the crisis and repaired the damage, the next mission is to rebuild and renew. And that's the exciting part. And so we're already working on some of these rebuild and renew initiatives. And there's things that's been on our sort of in our view for some time that we are working on, and we actually started to see some of these things happen even in this lockdown. And we just keep saying to each other that, if you pull off something significant in this time, you've got to know that it's not you. That really is God's unmerited favor in this.
Mm.
So there's some real exciting stuff that we trusting God for, and that we're working towards. These things obviously sort of run parallel to each other. But yeah, I'm hopeful that Mergon will come out of this actually in a way that we can accelerate out of this crisis. Obviously, the impact on the businesses will remain, and it'll take a good couple of years for this to work through on a number of fronts. But we're really hopeful that the future looks good despite these challenges.
Wow, Peter, it's really inspiring to hear that you guys are invigorated and energized even in the midst of this crisis. And I agree with you. I think liquidity is a prevalent theme for many businesses in this time. And it really is the oxygen of a business. So that does come to the forefront in times such as these, where you realize that every penny actually does count. I also quite like the description of a resilient portfolio. Everyone always, by default, speaks about a diversified portfolio. So maybe coming back to your resilient portfolio, do you think that I always think about Steve Jobs saying you can only connect the dots when you look backwards. So I'm just interested to know, you mentioned that you guys ratcheted down retail property exposure in the last few years, which obviously now in hindsight was the right thing to do and helps a lot when it comes to resilience of the portfolio. Was that a conscious decision a few years ago to do that? Was it an unctioning and you guys just went with it? Did it make sense at the time? Because obviously it's an act of foresight in a sense that you guys acted on. So I'm just interested to hear how you guys thought about building this resilient portfolio a few years ago, because at this point in time it's the best type of portfolio to have. I agree with you, rather resilient than diversified.
Yeah. Yeah, Johan. The interesting thing was we had a really good portfolio in real estate. Firstly, in just South African real estate, and then in SA and European real estate. And so the temptation is to stay in that, because if in a sense, if it's not broken, why fix it? It was doing well. But when we started thinking about what resilience looks like, I remember vividly us having the conversation and saying, retail real estate in Europe is a different industry and world from South Africa. And we had this debate, and eventually we said, actually, we should see it as a similar asset class, even though it's worlds apart. And so, let's diversify the portfolio. We initially diversified into a lot of stuff, and then started going quite widely, and then started bringing it back and really consolidating around three core industries, which is real estate, financial services, and technology.
Okay.
And it's been fascinating to see how the technology businesses have just kept going, almost with zero impact. The financial service, which is primarily King Price, has been able to pull down levers in order to make sure that it remains sustainable through this time. And the real estate have taken some real strain through this time. Although, thankfully, our real estate companies all seem fairly resilient by themselves at this time. So I guess, we have good reasons, but I don't think we're that clever. Johan, the fact is that wisdom comes with, you need to express faith. It's a lot like, like you said, it's in looking back that you see maybe the wisdom of things. James talks about, he says, if we ask for wisdom, God will give it to us, but we should not doubt. And so there's something of, when you ask for wisdom, you're taking a decision before you actually see what the outcome of the decision is. And so wisdom, you only see that when you've taken a step out in faith. And when we look back, we see that that faith journey has led us to a place where, in looking back, we actually see that there was wisdom involved in that. So I think we can just be thankful to God. I think there's a lot of people who have had wisdom that to make certain decisions, but the timing was maybe a bit off or whatever. And so, it's really much more grace, I think, than purely wisdom in that.
Thanks, Peter. I agree with you that wisdom is one part of it, but then acting on it in faith when you don't see the bigger picture, that's the trickier part in a sense. Not that it's easy to get wisdom either. So it's awesome to hear that you guys had this unctioning and you acted on it a few years ago. And I think those three streams, financial services, technology, and even still real estate going forward are really resilient. I think technology will be pushed forward by a number of years or decades, even because of this crisis and people's adoption of it. Financial services should remain robust, and over time, as a long-term asset, real estate has always proven to be a great asset. So I think those are three exciting and, as you say, resilient streams to be focused in as an investor. So excited alongside you to see how all of it unfolds in the medium to long term.
Thank you, Jan.
You guys also deal a lot with charitable organizations. You've mentioned the fact that you are in partnership with more than 100 charitable organizations. So I'm interested to know, with those close ties you enjoy with those PBOs and charitable organizations, what have been the major impacts of this pandemic on some of these organizations? Are there themes that have emerged where across these 100 plus organizations, it's these one or two things that are really impacting them? And I guess liquidity on their side will also be an issue, but are there anything over and above liquidity as such that's really been a big impact for them?
The general feedback that we are receiving is that, if we can just focus on South Africa, is that, these organizations are taking care of more people than ever before, but they have the same staff complement and their funding is dwindling. There's already been an impact. There's organizations who, that's been long established organizations that's experiencing 30, 40, 50% reduction in their support. And so you can imagine these people who are passionate about what they're doing, but they also have realities that they have to take care of, and more is expected of them with less resources at their disposal. And so, initially there was a lot of focus and energy, and we now 7-8 weeks down the line, I think people are really finding, and the people leading these ministries are really experiencing the strain of the crisis. It also seems that the cooperation between the non-profit sector and government is not as good as it can be, and so it's a complex field. But what is becoming abundantly clear is that the crisis is of actually epic proportions. So as Mergon, we've taken part of our allocation capacity and redirected it. We've established a fund called the Gap Fund. And the focus of this fund is all around sustainability, to make sure that great ministries that's doing really important work in caring for vulnerable people can continue doing that work after this crisis. And secondly, to help people that are leaning into this crisis and dealing at the forefront of the humanitarian side of it, that we can also help support them with the additional resources to make sure that they can keep doing this and not just expecting to do more with the same resources. And so that's sort of been our focus as Mergon. And, if anyone listening to this is keen to know more about this Gap Fund, we'd love to share with anyone.
I think that's a fantastic idea. And as you mentioned rightly, these organizations are at the forefront of chaos and pandemics most of the time. So they must be swamped now with additional needs. And they've got, as you say, the same staff complement and dwindling funds. So that makes for quite a disastrous recipe. And with you guys having the relationships you have with these organizations over such a long period of time, it just makes sense for anyone who really wants to stand in the gap and help these ministries from a funding perspective to partner with you guys as seed funder in the Gap Fund, because the vetting process is taken care of by you guys, because you know these organizations, you know they've stood the test of time, you know that whatever funds go in there will be used for good and will help to sustain this ministry. So I think it's an awesome call to action, and I would say that anyone that has an unctioning to participate in this, definitely speak to you guys, because you bring the knowledge of the lay of the land to the picture, which just makes any funder or donor much more comfortable with where their funding is going. So well done for establishing this initiative, and I trust that it will grow exponentially and be able to sustain a lot of ministries for a long time.
Thanks, Jan.
Peter, so from a recovery perspective, I mean, you're commercially minded, you an investor, you have been in business for a long time. So I'm very interested to hear from you just your thoughts around what this recovery looks like, what you expect it to look like. We can focus on South Africa, we can venture further abroad if you want to, but just interested to know if you think it's going to be a quick V-shaped recovery, more of a U-shaped recovery. Hopefully you don't think it's a flat line and it's the final act, but very keen to hear.
Yeah, Johan, I guess no one really knows. It is uncertain time, and I think one of the things that I've found challenging about this crisis is that things just seem to keep shifting on almost on a week by week or a 2 weekly basis, and so we don't know, is there going to be a huge next wave that comes? How are governments going to respond to that? How quickly and how easy will it be for governments to open up? And I think all those things have an influence. My sense is that, literally by the week, the longer this thing runs, especially with the lockdowns, the impact is accelerating on the economy. So if you ask me about a V or a U-shaped recovery, I think one has to distinguish between developed and developing world. I think we're going to sort of see a two-speed recovery. I think in the developed world, there's a lot of pain, but there's a lot of resources to back the economy and to pour into the economy to facilitate a recovery. And so I think it's going to, maybe not quite a V, but it's going to be a short U, if I can, I think it's going to take a while, but I think things are going to recover and fairly rapidly recover. Maybe towards the last quarter and the first quarter of next year, that's my best guess. I think the developing countries are going to have, and I guess there specifically South Africa, I think, we don't have in South Africa the level of resources that the Western countries have. And unfortunately, we're still footing the bill for 10 years of mismanagement in our country. And so we're not nearly as well positioned as we were in 2008 when we had the global financial crisis. And so if I just look around me and I see how many businesses are closing doors or within literally weeks of closing doors, and there's not the level of support to help those businesses see through. And to be honest, I also think there's a lot less private capital that's willing to invest into the country at the moment. And so, I think it's going to be a long U-shaped recovery for us. We will eventually recover. I think South Africa is a resilient country. And I think the one good thing, even though, there's differing views out there, the feedback that I'm getting is that the president is really in a strong position at the moment, probably stronger than ever in the cabinet and in the party. And he is pro-economy. It might not always feel to us as business leaders like that, but I don't think we can really doubt that he is really pro-economy and he really understands the economy. And so we have to have a little bit of grace for him that he really has a tightrope to manage. And but I think as soon as things open up, my hope and belief is that we will see the reforms that's needed that will eventually attract private capital and international capital back into the country. And so I think that will drive a recovery in time. That's my best guess, and I'm sticking to it.
I agree with you that we really do have to have grace for our leadership. And I agree with you that President Ramaphosa is pro-business, pro-economy, as you say. And I find myself being critical of him and his team quite often. But be that as it may, I am reminded again, and as you spoke as well, that we actually need to pray for our leadership. As a final question, I know stewardship is part of who you are. It's part of who Mergon is. It's part of your DNA. And you've alluded to the gap fund on the Mergon side, so you've partially addressed this question already. But as a steward, professionally speaking, personally speaking, in this time, what is the unctioning that you have about the allocation of resources, whether it be your time, talent, treasure? Where do you foresee that you will be for the short to medium term allocating those resources and to help people and businesses and organizations deal with what's happening at present?
Yeah, I mean, that's I guess, a tricky question that I continue to pray into, certainly, and it's something that we have to wait on God to give us guidance, and it looks different for each of us. I think, in a time where there's a crisis, it's not only a financial crisis, but it's also, and it doesn't only call for financial stewardship, but it also is a opportunity for us as Christians to step up and show leadership. And I think all of us who are in leadership in some way are stewards, not just of the resources that we have, but of the platform that God gives us. And so my prayer is that we will really, and what I'm trusting God to help me do, is to continue to lead with a kingdom perspective through this, so that whatever we do, we bring hope and extend dignity through this. We use the opportunity to see broken relationships healed. We try and be salt and light with every opportunity that we get. And it's in times like this where leaders are defined and where people look and say, well, what is the true character that's sitting within us as leaders? And so I think a lot of the stewardship happens inside of us, and is what God has put inside of us, that what are we going to do with what He's put in our hearts as leaders, and how is that going to come out in the way we engage with people, in the way we manage, difficult situations, perhaps even retrenchments or salary reductions, those type of things. And so for me, I think that's a lot of the stewardship questions I'm asking at the moment. The outward questions around managing resources, where do we put funding to, that's directed in many sense by some of the strategic priorities that we've identified. I have really trusted God that, that through this time, one of the words very early on that we got was that God will shake Mergon and only what's from Him will remain. And that's a little bit of a scary word on the one hand, but also a liberating word as well, that you're saying, God, help us to get to a point where whatever the foundation is that we have left, that we can build on going forward, that we will know that it's a sure foundation and it's something that we can really walk the journey with you going forward. And so, so I mean, we'll still see what that means for us, but we are just trying to be attentive and courageous to take the big steps that we need to take through this time, whether that means, making an investment at the right time, or exiting an investment, or, even, taking a big step in our distributions, that we will be willing to respond to the unctions that God puts on our hearts, and even if it takes a bit of courage from us.
Well, I love that insight about stewarding the platform that God has given us. Even when I asked you the questions, I was focused on time, talents, and treasure. But it's so good to be reminded of the fact that all of us are leaders in whatever capacity and whatever sphere of life we find ourselves in. And we have a responsibility to steward that leadership platform, knowing that the people who are following us in our realm of influence are real people. They need their lives need to be stewarded as well from a leadership perspective, and we need to love on them through this process, even though some of the things might be quite hard to do, as you mentioned, retrenchments, etc. And I agree with you. This is a time for courageous leadership. You mentioned courage, and coming back to what we said earlier, getting wisdom is one half of the challenge, and the second half of it is acting on it, especially in uncertain times. So, courageous leadership is something that's super important, and it's great to hear that you and Mergon as a group are focused on courageous leadership in a time such as this. So, I thank you for your time. Thank you for being with us, Peter. It was great speaking to you and inspiring as always. So, really looking forward to speaking to you, hopefully in person again sometime soon.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you for this initiative. It is wonderful to be able to learn from each other in this community, and there's amazing insights and experience within this community. And so I look forward to hearing more of these podcasts from your side.
Thanks, Peter. Much appreciated.